Average speed, it's not quite what it's cracked up to be. But if that's your main metric for getting faster, you're leaving some performance gains on the table. So in this video, I'm going to give you 3 ways to train reliably to make sure you're actually getting stronger, which will have a knock-on effect to your average speed. And not only that, one of them requires zero equipment, costs you nothing, and you can start it right now. Also, as a bonus, if you are training to power, I found a tool recently which means potentially no more FTP tests ever again. So I'll share that with you too. Hello my friends, and welcome back to the channel and another ultracycling related video. And this one's been a long time coming actually. I have a list of topics which I had to when I go for walks and stuff, things that I kind of want to talk about. This was the first thing I ever added, and here I am a year and a half later getting around to talking about it. Finally, average speed. I received a message recently and I wish I could say it was the first one, but it wasn't. Somebody messaged me and asked, what do I use to train? Which metric do I prefer? Do I use average speed? Do I use power heart rate? And not to make anybody feel bad, but it's a question that surprises me because average speed is not reliable at all. Training is something I've spoken about a fair amount in the last 6 months or so since I started working with my coach Giovanni, and I made some pretty good progress. But actually, training's not that new to me really. I've used all 3 of these methods myself over the years with varying amounts of success. They all do work. I'm hoping in this video to give you enough information to step your training up to the next level. So if you absolutely positively must increase your average speed, then I hope this helps you. It really doesn't take a lot of searching on YouTube to see that everybody wants a higher average speed. But I think you find on my channel I'm a bit of a realist and say it how it is, and I think I've watched enough of those videos myself, and something nobody seems to tell you is average speed is largely pointless. It's just the byproduct of all of the important metrics that we should be focusing on. So that's the first thing. Don't feel pressured to finish your ride with a high average speed. Essentially, it's a trap. Unless you're training for time trials and they're all a similar length, then you really need some variation in your training sessions. Otherwise, you're just going to become a specialist in a 20-minute effort. So I'm going to start with the method that requires the most investment but will give you the best result, and that is training to power. So you do need to buy a power meter to train this way, but it's the most accurate way to train and know that you're getting fitter. Power meters could be in your pedals, in your crank arm, in the crankset itself, but they're going to cost a few £100 possibly. But if you can afford it and you're serious about your training, that's the way to go. Essentially, to train this way you need to understand your functional threshold power, which is a number represented in watts. If you've ever been on an exercise bike in the gym, the number on the display going up and down when you pedal is probably watts. So historically, the way you find out your FTP is to perform a test. It's the theoretical amount of power you could produce for an hour before you're absolutely spent. But no one wants to do that. Instead, what you do, you get on your bike, you pedal like the clappers for 20 minutes. Whatever power you can sustain for 20 minutes, you take 95% of that, that's your FTP. So if you can sustain 100 watts, you have an FTP of 95 watts. And once you have that number, you can calculate your training zones. So zone 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you've probably heard of people running zone 2, that's endurance. So your zones, your training zones, they're a percentage of that FTP. So the way you build a structured training session, you need to spend differing amounts of time in different zones. And it could be literally any combination of those zones for different amounts of time for each interval. And a classic one as an example would be 2 times 20 minutes at sweet spot. I did a lot of that. And essentially sweet spot is right between tempo and threshold. The plan can be pretty complicated, it can be pretty straightforward. In my case, I have a coach that builds my plans, and I've done really well in the last 6 months. But what you need to do is to perform the same test after 3-4 months that you did at the start, and you'll see that number goes up. You can sustain a higher power, and that way you know for sure you're getting stronger. That's the most reliable way to train and make sure that you're making progress in your training. And as your fitness increases, so will your average speed. So, you've looked online, shopped around for power meters. They're expensive. And I know that because mine overreads. It works, it overreads by 70 watts for the whole range. So I can use it, I just have to account for that 70 watts. I've looked, I don't want to buy a replacement right now. But if you've looked too, it's far too expensive. There is a step down which will give you pretty similar results, not quite as reliable, but far cheaper. So before I was using power for training, I used heart rate for quite a long time. And I still use it now, often, but mostly for pacing. It's not as reliable as power, but it's still much more reliable than nothing. And you can do it in much the same way. I'm sure you know, when you train, the harder you push, the higher your heart rate goes. So you can train within certain zones of your maximum heart rate. I mean, as always, I'm not the authority on this stuff, I'm not a coach, but I'll explain what I did. I did a very similar threshold test to the power threshold test. Basically riding as hard as I could for 30 minutes and then took the average heart rate for the final 20 minutes and used that as my maximum heart rate. You can work off the back of a calculation also if you don't want to do the test, but that's again less accurate, but it's 220 minus your age, and that's again your theoretical maximum heart rate. But you can put that heart rate into an online calculator, give you all of your training zones as a range from say 150 to 160 beats might be your tempo, something like that. So then you'd have a heart rate monitor in a computer to see what your heart rate is real time, and you just push until your heart rate reaches that zone and hold it for as long as the workout dictates. And that's pretty similar to training to power. It's not as accurate because it takes a little while for your heart rate to climb to that number and you could overshoot it. But on top of that, lots of things affect your heart rate. It's going to behave very differently if you're fresher or more tired, the weather's hotter or colder. Lots of things affect your heart rate, but nevertheless, it's still a really good way to train if you don't want to commit to a power meter. For me, when I enter ultra endurance races, a good example, into the second day when I'm really tired, my legs could be pushing threshold power. But by that point, I usually find my heart rate won't go above zone 2 no matter how hard I push. So now we're into the training I did first that requires no investment, no cost whatsoever, and you can start it anytime you like. And if you know me, you know I really enjoyed the fact that it cost me nothing. This is training to RPE, or relative perceived effort, and essentially that's a long way of saying how hard does the effort feel. I'm gonna pull in now because it's starting to get pretty busy. It's actually rush hour and I'm out on my basic recovery training ride, so when I go through these 1 to 2 recovery, that's basically what I'm doing now. So essentially RPE is so simple. All you need to do is pay attention to how the effort feels in your legs, in your lungs, and how hard it feels. It works on a scale from 1 to 10. Imagine 1 to 2 is basically what I'm doing today. It's basic recovery. I'm just turning the pedals, keeping the bike upright. It's not hard whatsoever. It's conversational. That's basic recovery for me. 3 to 4, you're talking endurance. So imagine a pace you can ride all day. If you fuel correctly, you can keep doing it all day long. It's conversational, you can still speak, and you're feeling pretty good. 5 to 6, you're getting towards tempo. So it's going to become less conversational from here. You start to get out of breath. You can only really sustain that for, I don't know, 3-4 hours, something like that. For me, if I'm going out on a club ride or something, working fairly hard and doing it for several hours, that's probably going to be around tempo. After that, 7 to 8, you're getting towards threshold. Threshold again is going to be even less conversational. You're going to be out of breath, you're not really going to want to chat, and it's probably a pace you can hold for somewhere around 20 minutes, maybe an hour, depending on where you are in the threshold zone. So threshold is at 7 or 8, what comes after that? Imagine 9 would be roughly VO2 max. That's a level you can basically sustain for a few minutes, very much out of breath. After 2-3 minutes, something like that, you're gonna be smoked. 10 is all out, so sprinting as hard as you possibly can. How long can you sprint for? Probably 20 seconds, something like that. So essentially, once you know how these efforts feel, you can build a training plan based on those. So if you wanted to do 2 times 20 minutes at sweet spot, you know that's the upper end of your tempo, you know roughly how that feels. You can try to do a 20-minute effort at that level, have a bit of a rest and do another 20-minute effort. That's a classic 2 times 20 minutes session. You can do that based on feel, although it's not going to be as reliable as heart rate or power, but you can do it. It's going to be far more effective than training to average speed. So I'm sure you gathered by now, I really don't like the major focus on average speed. I've got some friends who joke and say if the ride's below 20 mile per hour average, you go straight in the bin. And you know who you are. It's all banter and jokes, but still, it's something that everybody focuses on. Even I do, we're all guilty of it really. But if you're training using one of these 3 methods, you're gonna get stronger for sure. It is gonna have a knock-on effect to your average speed, but your training sessions aren't gonna look as fast because you're gonna be resting during them. So I think it's important, just make that sacrifice for the greater good. You will get fitter in the long run. So lastly, as a bonus for hanging around until now, as I promised and teased at the start, a tool I found recently which I'm sure you'll find as useful as I did. And really, I should credit it to Dylan Johnson, that's how I found this. The FTP test is the part of training that most of us dread, and if you don't, you're just a bit of a sadist. But I found a tool called Xert, X-E-R-T. Not selling it, I've signed up for a trial of it. You do have to pay, but you can get a free trial. And what it does is estimate your FTP based on your training. So a bit like if you use Zwift, and when you race or you ride quite hard in an event, it will estimate an increase in your FTP, and most likely you hit yes thanks, I'll take that. Essentially this is doing the same thing, but analysing your training through Garmin or whatever you link to it. So I linked my Garmin and got an assessment of my FTP based on all the training I've done with Chobani over the last 6 months. And that just means I don't have to go through the pain of an FTP test. I know what my current FTP is based on all of that data. And yes, it's based on a power meter that overreads by 70 watts. I know exactly what it overreads by. All I need to do is drop it by 70. I know what my FTP is based on Xert's calculations. And for me, it was really positive. It was around a 23% increase from when I started training with Chobani 6 months ago. Anyway, you may not believe in that kind of software. I do. If the same thing happened in Zwift, I take the bump in FTP if it assessed my FTP as having increased during a race. So I'm going to take it from Xert too. Anyway, I think that's just about going to do it. I live in the city and this has been pretty hard to film during rush hour, so bear with me. If it has been useful, then subscribe and like the video and all that lovely stuff. And I'll see you all on the next one.